So, I have a question for you. Are there things in your family that are just reliable and predictable and things that you expect? They follow a certain trajectory. I always said when growing up with my brother, sister, and I, there was a few things you could count on. The first is that two of us at any given time would be fighting like cats and dogs. The next was that if something ever happened when my parents were away and they got home and asked what had happened or who had done it, the three of us always said it wasn't me, which led to this long-running joke that there was actually a fourth sibling in the family called It Wasn't Me, who tended to spill juice on the couch or leave out dishes when no one was around. And then one other thing that always was quite reliable was that if you gave Mom a plant to put up around the house because you thought it was pretty, she would almost always kill it. To this day, when I go home and I stick my hand in a plant pot, I know there's going to be about an inch of water because she knows I'm coming home and I'm going to check. Well, the account we read in John today is a story where the way things happen are expected to happen in a very real, practical way. Lazarus has died, he has been buried for 4 days, and the family is grieving. So those things are just fact, and they're irreversible. So this is really a passage where through a lot of it there's this sense of sorrow and lament and loss. And it's interesting, there was a lot of thoughts around how resurrection worked in the ancient world. So some believe that life after death required a physical body and a spirit. And it meant that when Christians were being persecuted, it wasn't uncommon for them to burn or maim or scatter the body in order that people would feel discouraged, and it would keep morale low because it robs them of the possibility of resurrection. And for others, there were some in the ancient world, like a group called the Gnostics, who thought their body was just a totally cumbersome thing, and they couldn't wait to free themselves of it and just be a spirit. However you looked at it, the idea of a body being raised from the dead was something that just doesn't happen. And in the story of Lazarus today, there's this additional layer on top of it when you get reading. John makes the point that there's a key here. 4 days. Lazarus has been dead for 4 days. And people believed in the ancient world that when a person died, their spirit kind of hovered near the body for 3 days, and then it would depart on the 4th day. So John has made a real point of saying this 3-day period has passed, we're well into the 4th day. There's literally nothing that could be done. And it's interesting to me that in this account, everyone says, if you had just gotten here sooner, he wouldn't have died. But now that he has died, this is out of our hands. There's nothing we can do. So thanks for showing up, but it was a bit too little too late, really. So when Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead in this account, he's doing something that it's not only miraculous because we're well past the 3 days at this point, but it's just unheard of. No one's done this before. And the grief that the family's experiencing gives way to a joy that nobody could have anticipated. And while I love reading about this account in John, I find there's a tension here as I try to balance the reality of life against the hope of God. And those are two things that I find we always have to hold in tension. And I think it's something that perhaps we're feeling even a little more acutely than normal. Over the last couple of years, we've run a grief and loss course in the winter at the Kirk. And one of the things that we talked about was this idea that not only are there big griefs in life, like the loss of a loved one or a divorce or things like that, there's also countless smaller griefs that we carry and maybe don't even acknowledge. So it could be the ending of a job, or retirement, when we've done something for a long time and now we're not quite sure what to do, we're at odds with ourselves. You've got illness, the loss of a routine, someone moving into a nursing home. All of these things can become little griefs in our life. And this past week, I've been hearing a lot of things that really are the same thing. They are these little griefs that add up and create a lot of sorrow and a lot of angst in our lives. And we do have a lot to grieve as a global community. We feel anxious, and we're reading updates about cities that are totally overrun, places that don't have the medical supplies that they need, medical personnel getting sick. And we have all of these headlines that we're reading almost obsessively throughout the day. So things are changing quickly. There's this crush of news. And then on top of that, we have all of this uncertainty just in our day-to-day lives. So maybe our jobs have ended, or maybe our jobs are no longer secure. We have a loss of routine. We're not getting up and going out the door in the morning anymore. There's other things like feeling bored or purposeless. Some express it through humor, and others through lament, and others still just seem to be holding everything together as well as they can right now, because it feels like if we let something crack, then it all just might fall apart. So there's just a lot going on. And there are two things that I've found helpful over the past week that I'd like to share today. And the first is that I think we do need to grieve. Like Mary and Martha desperately missing their brother and the friends and family that have gathered around them in their loss. My friend Christopher reminded me this week that sometimes we need to just lament our losses. And we need to say it out loud. My job has come to an end right now. Or I no longer feel a sense of security in the world. Maybe our young people were graduating from high school or university and they've either been canceled or they're looking tenuous. There's this loss of connection with each other, feeling adrift. Like, I know even normal chores have become like this gargantuan task. The other day, I went to the grocery store because I'm the designated shopper in the family and I'm trying to get groceries for other people. And so I get there and it just became this really exhausting process because, some things are there and some things weren't, and everyone's trying to give everyone else space. And then at the end, I shop at the big superstore on University. So I kind of finished over in the frozen food section. And normally I just walk back down to the cash registers, so they have everything marked out 6 feet. And all of a sudden I'm like, well, there's this gap. Do I walk through the gap to get to the end to the open cash register? Do I go back down around? And I was just standing there thinking, this is absolutely exhausting and I have no idea what I'm doing. So even little things can just kind of start to wear on us. And then on top of that, we're worrying about the people around us. We're worried about them that they might fall ill. We're getting frustrated towards people who maybe aren't doing things as carefully as they should be. And so everything's just kind of agitating. And it is okay not to be okay in the middle of all this, because we've never been here before. We're figuring this out as we go along together, and that's not easy. And I've got friends who are thriving. They're learning how to do new things. They're painting, they're baking bread, they're learning new skills. And then I have other friends who just can't get up off the couch and are feeling completely just unable to do anything. And I think that we need to give ourselves the space to grieve and to process however we need to, and to not feel guilty about that. That however you're coping with this, it's how you're coping. And that's really the best we can do. And we echo those words from Psalm 130 that say, "Out of the depths I cry to you, O Lord." Like, we need you. And I think there's also the anticipatory grief that we may be feeling. And this is the one that I really struggle with. It's like, I can imagine the 50 worst things, the 50 worst outcomes. Obviously, they're all going to happen, and they're all going to happen at the same time. And seriously, we wonder how long things have to go on like this. How long is this going to affect our daily lives? How long is this going to affect work? And this one's tough because there's an element of lament. There is grief here, but there's also fear and anxiety. I went to a therapist after having Grayson, and she always told me, take it one day at a time. Deal with things as they come up. And, you know, the Bible tells us the same thing. The Bible tells us each day has enough worry of its own. So it's really hard not to be thinking ahead and not to be worrying ahead. And, you know, we want to anticipate what might happen and what we might want to prepare for. But that's also really draining and really difficult, and it really saps our life. So sometimes I find making a list of the things that are floating around in my head makes things much more concrete. It helps me name the things that I'm worried about or afraid of. Oh, and it also helps you say, you know, this is a today problem, and, you know, this is a tomorrow problem, and I don't have to deal with this right now. So do what you need to do to give yourself the time out to help you kind of bring yourself back and center yourself. And if you need to, you're surrounded by a community of people who love you. So talk to the people around you, talk about what's going on, and the thing is, we're probably all feeling something similar. And the last thing is this. We remember that even when things seem impossible, we find hope in God. In a couple of weeks, we'll celebrate Easter, where we are reminded that hope did not die on a cross. It did not remain buried in a tomb. And even among the struggle, we see things like caremongering, people helping people all over. There's the PEI bear hunt, the Nova Scotia kitchen party, and there's countless people offering rides and offering